All right, hello everyone and welcome to the SIG Testing weekly meeting. Today is November 27th. This is being recorded and will be put up to YouTube at some point in the future. Today on the agenda, first, Matt, you've got cron jobs concurrently.
Yeah, so right now cron jobs will not run concurrently at all. They don't look at the max concurrency. It'll only, or Herologium, is that right? Will only schedule one at a time. I'd like to be able to do more than that.
So I've got a clear to cron jobs here is Kubernetes agent periodic jobs on Prow, not the cron job resource.
Yes, Kubernetes periodics. And my PR specifically only affects periodics that use the cron style as opposed to the interval style, which there's a to-do to kill interval style jobs. So that's kind of there's two things I wanted to talk about. One is this is behavior changing, and that currently max concurrency would effectively be 1. So I want to make a script to update any existing cron job to be max, like add the max concurrency 1, and then anybody else using Prowl would have to update their job definitions or potentially have max concurrency go over 1. 0 is infinite. There was some discussion on the PR, but yeah, so I think people are okay with it. I just wanted to kind of get consensus.
Ben, I can't remember, do you guys have, are you specifically, because I can't think of any of our periodics that we need them to be serial.
There's a number of them. So if you have, like, say, a scalability test, sometimes it takes longer than expected. So we're like opportunistically scheduling things as quickly as possible. Another one is actually, say, like build jobs. Typically for those, we just set some extremely low interval instead of a cron. And we lean on it won't run them more than like actually continuously. We don't want to be running like 10 builds at once, but we do want to build as quickly as we can.
Right. So if we set max concurrency, that'll work. But
right.
Am I the only one who wants this, or is this?
No, I think that's a feature that we want. The only question is, do we want the cleaner route of the default just being 0, the Go style, and take the effect that people who have probably intentionally or unintentionally been leaning on the existing behavior get bitten by the change, or do we want the ugliness of like some magical default value?
I mean, all we need is to put it into announcements.markdown, and then it's fine, right?
I think so. This one's probably fairly breaking of like reasonably common jobs. I don't have a good way to grasp like how much, say, like Istio depends on the serialization or not. Because the thing that I think about this is that you could very easily depend on this without knowing about it as well. So yeah. I think that if we make an announcement, we need to make it as like widely as like we might want to consider more than just announcements.md for this. Because is
Istio building their own version of the images, or are they just using whatever you guys publish?
So I don't remember if they're building them, but they are running at like a version. I believe they are. They have a fork that they regularly sync. They still have actually 1 or 2 things with very minor forks to them. I believe Bootstrap is one of the main ones.
Okay. I think, especially if they have a fork, I think putting it into announcements and having a tool that automatically sets everything to 1 is like enough due diligence.
Yeah,
that's what I was wondering. I mean, Matt called that out. Is that not?
That's reasonable. I think we should probably reach out to the people that we know use Prow publicly and mention like, hey, when you update, you're gonna want to check this.
So the other thing is I only did this for cron style, not interval style. Do we want to do it for interval style as well? That's kind of, there's a comment that says it's deprecated. So my thought was, if you're not updating things yourself, then maybe you get the old deprecated behavior, but
being a Googler, deprecated just means stable.
Well, I was under the impression, from what I remember, there you have 2 options: the one that's not ready yet, and the one that's already been deprecated. So
right. So like, I don't think we want to force everyone to think about crons. There's a lot of jobs that just kind of like, run it once an hour. They don't really care the exact schedule. And that kind of actually helps avoid people doing stuff like scheduling all of the jobs to run at the beginning of the hour or something.
Right.
So I think we probably don't actually want to deprecate that also because the functionality is pretty simple. And I think that we do probably want this behavior for it because it's useful. And
if anything, it'll make a job, right?
This is kind of a separate thing, but it's getting kind of awkward where like prow jobs have all these disjoint fields that only apply to some and not the other.
Right.
We should avoid that.
I'm confused. I thought Matt suggested a default behavior that would make it work the way it used to. If max concurrency is 1, then it's still serial. So I'm confused as to your issue.
Right now, max concurrency is always implicitly 1 because there is no configuration for this.
Yeah, so why can't that still just be the behavior?
So we were discussing there's 2 options there. One is if we don't supply this field, we do that, which is kind of ugly.
It's not that there's currently a field and it's 1.
No, I understand the situation. I guess I didn't understand why you would think that's ugly. Like,
so the thing that I think makes it ugly is that the base prow job has a max concurrency field, which is just ignored by the interval jobs. And the comment in there says 0 is, infinite concurrency. So it currently, like if we implement it to where one job has one default and the other ones have another default, then when you're using the base job, it gets interpreted differently based on which, what it is embedded in. Seems like a very strange behavior. It's something else you have to keep in your head where, this is an interval job, so it defaults to 1, but other types of jobs default to 0. It just feels.
But that's only for people that care about it. I mean, to me, if you're concerned about it, and most people wake up tomorrow, and to them nothing has actually changed based on the behavior, then you're only affecting those who want to explicitly define it anyway.
Right, and there's not too many of those, but they didn't need to explicitly define it before, and they definitely need it. The other thing, I guess, is just that if this were Kubernetes, I'm pretty sure the way this would work is you would have a new API version. The old API version would keep doing what it did, and we don't have that going on in Prow. So we have this V1 API, but we're going to change how it behaves.
We do have it.
I think it's the right path because we've made breaking changes before, and this makes things saner.
Yeah, but I would disagree. We do have it because the API string you're referring to is not defined anywhere. You can't actually find it if you want to go look for it. So it's just like Kubernetes because you don't know where the new one's defined either. It's a joke, right? Try to go find an index of all those API strings in Kubernetes.
So I think, Ben, the other thing too is aside from being more diligent on the versioning of the CRD, I think we at some point should probably just create a CRD and version the actual config too.
Yeah,
that might be nicer. We might also be able to get around some of the issues because at some point I think the larger Prow deployments are going to start hitting the config map size limits.
I would also say, we have some problems with that. We've hit apply limit.
Yeah, so we've hit apply limit, and soon I think our job definitions are going to hit the config.
I would also add that if we do this, we should probably start with V1 Alpha 1.
Yep.
Instead of V1.
Oh, yeah. Well, when I made that, we had that conversation, and it was already V1, so we couldn't really retroactively go back to
let's look back later. I think we also probably want to redesign the CRD as well at some point. It's kind of an amalgamation of different things right now.
Yeah. So
I would like to get Cole to respond to this again if he hasn't, but I think otherwise, unless he raises some objections, we should go forward with just making the default 0, and we should update the relevant jobs.
And we should do it for both types of periodics.
And we should send out I guess maybe the Prow channel on Slack can serve as a way to notify people as well now.
Yeah, do we have a strong list of all the deployments and a contact for each one of them? Because that would make this a lot easier.
We have at least a partial list in the docs now. I don't know if we have contact points, but we could probably go from.
So this has happened before. I forgot what it was. I think I think Steve, you may have raised the issue before to do with regular expressions matching tests. Is there maybe a potential philosophical behavior we might want to modify where we avoid defaults or unspecified defaults, or rather implied defaults, and try to be more explicit so that people do think about these things moving forward, or at least if they don't have to think about it because it's just theirs. It just seems like this is the second time this has become an issue because of an implied default that would potentially change. We have to.
I think the change here, like moving it to having, 0 imply unlimited, does that. So I think that does move into, like, if you need concurrency, you should explicitly set it. At the same time, I think, like, with the way that the configuration is structured right now, if we, like, there's so much verbosity and there's so much repetition that if we made everything explicit, it would.
I'm saying more specifically with integers or booleans, empty should perhaps mean unspecified versus false or 0. I was thinking -1 earlier, Ben, but to me that's just a different take on the same problem.
Well, it's super unlikely. Like it still makes you opt into infinite.
Yeah.
It's questionable whether that's correct or not, though.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that I think that's not an uncommon way to specify infinite, though.
Well, I think I've seen 0 more frequently than that. I guess what I was suggesting was that empty not be taken to mean necessarily the 0 value, it being taken to mean empty. And in this case, there could be the opportunity to say, oh, you didn't specify. That's on us to define that behavior, and you shouldn't count on what that means moving forward.
And we could, as another option instead, we could have a default and like an explicit default in config, and 0 implies default. I mean, 0 just doesn't actually make sense as a value for concurrency.
Job.
That's like a job that doesn't run.
Yeah, but I mean, some more like rigorous approach to input defaulting and input digestion, I think, is something that we need to talk about when we do a breakout on the config. Because I think one of the other like symptoms of that issue is like all of the places where we take some user input and we digest it into something, or like parse it as a URL or as a regex and then put it into a different field. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's just like a lot of things we need to talk about at some point.
I think I'm fine with going forward with either change as long as we just make a beyond the announcements item D. Let's contact some people.
Yeah, I think that's enough due diligence.
Let's consider improving this in the future, possibly with something like a separate global default or whatever.
I have a concern on the PR because now we have both Harlogium and Planck manages maximum concurrency, right?
Oh, I think.
Why not just punt to Planck?
So if you put to Planck and let's say you set your max concurrency at 1, it will queue up all of those jobs, and you can end up with like new jobs never actually being run because you're just continually adding. So if you have a job that runs every minute and it takes 10 minutes to run, your job queue will just grow infinitely.
We can queue maximum 1 job.
We should.
Well, that's what Harlogium is doing. Harlogium saying queue this job to be run by Planck, and then Planck saying, okay, it's now time to execute this.
Yeah.
Right.
Both of them are checking maximum concurrency, which is
right. So if Harlogium doesn't check max concurrency, it will queue forever.
Right. Yeah, we should. No, that makes sense. And so the other reason that this is good is that even independently of like swarming jobs, you don't want to stuff CRDs unnecessarily. That is actually a scaling issue too.
Yeah, you'll crash your API server.
Can someone tell me how to spell hero key?
We'll put it in the talk. Yeah.
Thank you. That's why I couldn't figure out what you were saying. Thank you.
Cool, Sen. Do you want to talk about metadata?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I'm working on migrating all the Kubernetes end-to-end test from Bootstrap to PodUtils. I think I got them running. The last missing piece, I think, is so currently Bootstrap merges this metadata.json generated from kubetest into finish.json. And those data are used by both Kubernetes and TestGrid to show, for example, commit number and build number. I guess most important is the commit number of for example, the version of Kubernetes you are testing. So I'm trying to let sidecar mimic the similar behavior, merge metadata.json into finish.json. Steve mentioned he has a artifact uploader controller, which can handle pod logs. But I just discussed with Ben. Looks like the only thing I'm not sure is how that controller can handle like artifact files.
Yeah. So the idea way back when, before whatever happened and the train hit us, Ben wanted to have a proxy server for artifacts so that the actual uploading management would be handled by something outside of the job.
Well, specifically logs. I don't know if it makes sense for the files.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But like totally independent of that, I would really like us to move forward on like I've talked like both sides. It doesn't really matter to me who, I don't have bandwidth, but someone who's looking at this problem like Sam or Cole, I'd like to get in particular TestGrid working with the commit IDs again. We can't really move like blocking Kubernetes release jobs until we have that, because it's used so much for triaging to say like between this commit and that commit, and what's the diff. So like we need to get that in TestGrid in particular. We need to get that metadata plumbed through. I'm interested in solving that now and coming back around to like elegant solutions like having a separate controller or something. Because there's a lot of jobs that I would start migrating, but like without that functionality, there's a pretty significant loss in CI signal.
So I think I'm not certain it's going to be much more work in either direction, but I think one of the things something that lives outside of the job, like one of the benefits of that is, if you have a full-fledged client, you can look at the entire prod job, CRD. I think we had talked about a couple of times, like actually uploading the YAML for the prod job and for the pod at some point. And also, if you have that information, you should be able to create are you looking for the commit IDs for, like, are those like the
one that's under test? So like the primary checkout, just like plumbing through that commit ID is super useful. Like we can lose stuff like the test info one, that's not super important, but the one that's under test, that TestGrid gives you the functionality to like drag between two.
Right. I guess I didn't know if you meant like because there's some jobs that generate that commit ID and there's some jobs that take that as like declarative.
So there are 3 types of IDs actually I can think of. The first is whatever, if it's a pre-submit, it will trying to get the pull ref. If it's a, say, erratic job has a extra ref, it will get the whatever base ref it trying to clone. Also, if for Kubernetes CI test,
does the extra ref have a base ref there, or is it just going to be like a floating ref, like a branch line?
What will it use? For example, say Kubernetes testing from master. It should.
And that's the ID you would want there, not the commit that it resolved to.
We want the commit.
Okay.
Also, there's for the Kubernetes end-to-end test, it's actually extracted from kubetest because we don't actually clone the Kubernetes repo. We download the tarball, and kubetest will populate the metadata.json with a commit number, commit hash from the tarball.
Yeah, so I think if there's things that are like 100% generated at runtime by the job, like we have to put it into something like sidecar. Yeah.
We can come back later and figure out some way to pass that to the sidecar, but again, I think that will be easy enough to change later, or potentially we can even replace the entire GCS layout at some point. It's just that's a lot more investment.
Yeah.
Right now, we're mostly doing the same thing Bootstrap was, but we dropped that field, and that field is super useful for CI. So besides even the custom metadata, that one is like blocking me from moving all of our
Yeah. So I think maybe we should, and I mean, I didn't really have any blockers in the PR, but maybe we should can we upload just the metadata and stuff, and then because you're also doing this like the downward API spec, right, which is a subset of the ProwJob spec. Unless you need that as a specific YAML file, maybe we should wait on doing that until we could just upload the actual ProwJob spec itself.
Is there a reason to not just try to keep all of that data? I don't think it would be too large, as opposed to trying to decide what, for example, commit ID to use based on the situation. Say, well, if there are 3 different types, have 3 different fields, and if it's one of those, it would be populated.
We keep all of that in another file, but
okay.
But there's tooling like TestGrid and Kubernetes and the triage dashboard and things that already focus on the one that the job has told them is the primary one. And that tooling is used heavily by people that are not in Prow or anything, but are just, monitoring signal and so forth.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
So Sen, if you do the job version and the commit stuff and the metadata upload now, but we don't do the spec upload right now, does that block something in TestGrid from working?
I don't think so. It's just good to have because Bootstrap upload a spec version.
Okay.
So Bootstrap no longer uploads a spec, and that needs to be removed because we removed kubectl access to the cluster for other reasons like.
Right. So that's the thing, is you need access to actually get the spec. So maybe let's not check it into Sidecar and just put it in the controller, because the controller should have access to that, and that should be pretty simple to do.
Okay, I can drop that part. Yep.
But the rest of it seems to be fine.
Okay.
We should probably move on to the last item before we run out.
Tim?
That only takes 30 seconds probably. Just sort of a shout out, hey, we exist. There's been some discussion of support and long-term support and what that could mean in terms of what users want and implications to the project were we to even go there. So the work group is forming. It's just a place to talk about these things, catalog, enumerate the problem space, figure out what might be possibilities. So obviously, were any changes to be proposed, they would dramatically impact testing, and y'all would be a key blocking stakeholder on that. But we would like you to not just, at the point that some KEP is bubbled out, to be like, oh no, that's horrible and ridiculous, could never work, but to be involved in the discussions and help and shape, guide what we might do for improvements for users of the project. So there's a link there to the meeting agenda. It's Tuesdays, 9 a.m. Pacific, alternating weeks with SIG cluster lifecycle, and the PR link for SIG's YAML. That also includes like a work in progress draft charter and a README and some sort of links and general information, but we're trying to get the conversations going towards some type of action, because this has been talked about a lot and there's a gap versus what users want, but we need to turn that into some concrete actions to improve the situation for operators and users. So that's basically it. Any questions?
Well, 20 minutes ago, we were just talking about how breaking changes just need an update in a markdown file. So, we're totally for an LTS, right?
Yeah.
It's the right answer.
You just mark v1 alpha 1, right? That's what you said and done.
And this won't encourage a discussion of whether or not Kubernetes is a distribution or a kernel at all.
Yeah, so open minds, flame retardant suits, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that's going to come up at some point that's not exactly SIG testing, but we wind up being involved in a lot is like which artifacts are the community or not. Like I know recently the Debians and the RPMs are a bit awkward because of the way they're hosted. And there's even been some discussion that I'm sort of in favor of at this point, that like maybe we shouldn't try to host all of the ways of installing it. I'm sure that'll get interesting in that group too.
Yeah, the basic question of what is Kubernetes, what is the responsibility of the project to output for artifacts and obviously test and ensure that they are good for some definition of that and integration, and you start to look like a distro maybe, and like all sorts of complexity.
Cool.
And we'll also be at the Contrib Summit. We've got a session on the calendar there to chat about this. I'm sure there will be lots of raw fruit in the air.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Cool, and we're out of time. If there's something we didn't cover but you want to, go ahead and throw it into next week's agenda. Thanks everyone for coming.